This video is a bit of a rant about a trend I've seen developing over the last 10 to 15 years in product development, especially low-end product development. And it started when embedded development boards became readily available for things such as microchip PICs, Arduinos, this sort of thing. And what seemed to happen was it sparked a trend where individuals would buy these development kits, download the libraries that came with them, which were only really intended for test purposes, and then turn them into products without any real further development. And it's invariably led to gimmicky items that were functionally limited or just plain didn't work. Now unfortunately that's been making its way up the food chain, and we now have a situation where the lack of attention to detail in product development in certain fields has got to an epidemic level, and the developers of machines just don't seem to know what they're supposed to be aiming for, and just come out with a machine that looks good, goes through the motions, but is fundamentally a pain for anyone that buys it. This prompted me to write a book several years ago that started to address this, and it's something that I want to touch on over a series of videos on product development. I've been a product developer now for over 30 years, and one thing that is very apparent when you develop successful products is they not only have to fulfill the function they're intended for, but they have to not frustrate the people that you're trying to sell them to. Now, as the first example in exceedingly poor product design, I'm going to look at this 3D printer. It's a FlashForge Guide 2 machine. It's one of the worst examples of design I've ever seen. There's some fundamental problems with it. I have reported these to FlashForge but got no response. Just by way of example, this is not the sort of thing that's limited just to this machine, but this does have some examples of very poor product development and thinking. So I'll go through what the main issues are. This will be far clearer if you have used 3D printers and struggled to get good printing, and often it's not because of what you're doing. I've got a number of 3D printers and they all have various quirks, but you can generally set them up relatively quickly to work reliably, but not so with this machine. This is one of those things that it's a fundamental issue with the machine. The reason I bought this machine was because it has a very large build volume, but it's getting to the point where this will shortly end up in a skip unless FlashForge do something to actually make it work properly. Now, it goes through all the motions, it goes up and down, side to side, does some weird things now and again, but there is two fundamental problems with it. If you are familiar with 3D printing, you'll know that one of the critical things is the distance between the print head and the platform you're building on. The layers of plastic that you're trying to lay down on the bed could be as thin as 0.1 millimeters or less, which means that the positional accuracy of this bed relative to the print head has to be very precisely controlled. With this machine, for some bizarre reason which I cannot understand, there is a sensor switch on the print head. So you'd think they'd use that to zero the position of the platform, because it's obviously close to the print head, and so should in theory minimize the errors you're seeing. But they don't do that. For some reason they put a home sensor right at the bottom of the machine, and it uses that to home the Z-axis. That has a few issues. Firstly, it's exceedingly frustrating to use the machine. I'll show you what I mean by that in a few minutes. But also the errors that you will see from the bottom of the machine to the top are far greater than the required positional error of the distance between the print head and the platform. So while the lead screw etc is quite good, I'll give you a quick example of what causes a problem with this. So you'll come in to do your print, you'll switch the machine on, you'll start your print, and it will almost certainly fail the first few times you try to run it. and I'll show you why if I just reposition the camera. So I've got a dial gauge here set up on the bed, so it's measuring the distance between the platform and the printhead. Now in this case it doesn't really matter what the distance is. What we're looking for is any deviations in that are caused by anything outside of the control of the machine. And because of where they've placed the home sensors, that is very important. It's a tall machine, but as the machine starts its first print, these things generate quite a lot of heat and the machine will start to warm up. I've got a hot air gun here. Now I'm not going to get the machine particularly hot, but if you watch the dial gauge as I start this thing going, it's a bit noisy I'm afraid, but if you watch the dial gauge, I'm not getting the machine particularly hot. I've got the hot air gun quite a long way back. We're just blowing some relatively warm air into the machine. If you watch the dial gauge, okay, so it's changed by what amounts to 2 layer thicknesses, and that's just with a few seconds of a hot air gun blowing from a distance. The machine is not warm, it's not really warmed it up much, you can't feel any difference in temperature, but as the machine warms up during normal use, this error between the printhead and the platform, just due to temperature changes of the machine structure itself, results in a difference change in the relative positions between the printhead and the platform of up to 5 layer thicknesses if you're printing at 0.15 millimeters, and that makes it unusable. In general, what you have to do is run several prints, wait for the machine to try and stabilize, and then hope it doesn't change temperature too much while you're running the print. For very small prints, generally you can get it set up by starting the prints a few times and then just adjusting the screws on the platform until you get the print to stick and to give you a good result. But that leads us on to the second problem. This is more of just a stupid thinking on the part of the designer. I'll just reset the camera so I can demonstrate what the issue is, and then we'll compare this to an older FlashForge machine, and I'll explain what the problem is. Okay, so I've got the camera positioned looking inside the machine, and I'll demonstrate what the problem is. And as I said, this is just poor thinking on the part of the developers, and the problem is how slowly they drive the Z-axis to put the platform into position. It drives incredibly slowly, and bear in mind you might need to go through this process several times for each print because of the other design issues with the machine, and overall it makes the machine exceedingly frustrating to use. So what I'm going to do is start a build, and I've got a stopwatch. I'm going to time how long it takes the platform to get into position. Okay, so I'll press build and start the stopwatch at the same time. So the stopwatch is now running. Now I will fast forward through this in the video so it won't get too boring. Okay, so it takes 1.5 minutes to get up to the position where the machine is ready to start the print. Now it's not starting because the temperatures haven't equalized yet, so you could say, well, it doesn't matter then. But the issue is, as I said, you quite often have to start the print several times because of the poor design of the overall machine in terms of it changing shape when it heats up. So what I'll do now is show you what happens if you have to cancel the print, simply because you want to restart it. So if you want to restart a print because it's got up to temperature but it's failed to print properly, so you have to cancel the print and restart, which, as I say, you will have to do several times with this machine, most times when you start a print. So if I cancel this, and I'll start the stopwatch at the same time as I do this. So if we keep an eye on it, and again I'll fast forward through this. Okay, so it's finally got into the start position for the print. It's now going to go through the same process again. Cancel the print, it will drive all the way to the bottom, and it's taking 2.5–3 minutes each time you do a simple step. And it might not sound like a long time, but when you have to go through all these steps 2, 3 or 4 times just to start what could be a 15-minute print, then it is quite ludicrous. That combined with the number of prints that fail simply because the machine is changing size as it warms up. This machine can easily waste 3, 4, 5 hours of print time every day just to fundamental design flaws that the developers should be able to design out in a few days if they just put their minds to it and actually try to use the machine. Now, in case you think I'm being a bit harsh on this machine, there are many other design faults with it. The USB connection is in the wrong place. All these things point towards lack of thought during development, and they just haven't tried to use the machine. And they might have them running in the lab non-stop, running prints. Probably work fine. The machine's at a fixed temperature all the time, but they need to try and test it in a way that the users will test it. These faults have been reported to them. They've done nothing about it. They don't seem interested in it. So as I say, this machine will almost certainly end up in the skip. Just to give you a comparison with another machine, so that you don't think I'm being unfair on this particular machine and that maybe this is inherent to all 3D printers, I'll just move the camera across to an older machine, a smaller brother of the Guider. Ignore the jiffy bag on the door, that's just to stop annoying reflections. I'll do the same thing with this one. I'll start the machine printing, and I'll time it. So I'll start the stopwatch at the same time as I press print. So here we go. And as soon as the head's in position, I'll stop the timer. Okay, so about 12 seconds, 15 seconds, and it's in position. If we now want to cancel this and get it back to the home position, so I'll do the same thing again. Cancel print and start the stopwatch. Okay, so less than 10 seconds and it's ready to start printing again. To put it another way, this is 20 times faster than this. Now, admittedly, it's not as tall, but it's only about 60% shorter. So even if you double this, it's still 10 times faster than the Guider. And the developers of the Guider just need to, give some thought to development. What is it they're trying to develop? It's a 3D printer, address the fundamentals of what's required for a 3D printer. These printers aren't particularly cheap. They might look nice, but they have fundamental issues that stop them being functional, and that's something that these days, as I say, is becoming more commonplace, and it's making its way up the food chain to bigger and bigger and more expensive equipment. And really it needs addressing to force developers to put some testing, product testing, into whatever they are creating before they put it onto the market. These things are coming onto the market and just expecting the end users to have to do all the development legwork simply because the developers can't be bothered to, and worse than that, the developers won't respond when you flag these fundamental issues up with these machines. This machine, old machines, far cheaper, haven't had any issues with this whatsoever. It prints, it extrudes, the usual things, setting it up, aligning it, and then it works fine. The Guider 2, every third print it will stop extruding halfway through, maybe a 5-hour print, and that's just time wasted. You then got the additional time wasted while you try and get the thing restarted. Unblocking the head usually means completely dismantling it, which can take an hour. The whole machine needs rethinking, and anyone developing this sort of machine just needs to take it seriously. If you're going to develop a machine, test it properly. Any comments on this would be welcome. I'd be interested to hear any experiences that people have had with this sort of thing, or any comments on whether you think I'm being too harsh on them, or if this is something that you also feel needs to be addressed.